Earth had lived in peace for centuries. The cities were thriving. Technology advanced beyond imagination, and humanity had become masters of their own destiny. But in the quiet of this golden age, there were whispers of something dark, something unknown that lurked in the far corners of the galaxy. No one knew the exact moment it would happen, but they all felt it. The calm before the storm. Captain Alexander Hayes had been stationed on Earth's largest military base, watching the stars. He was once part of the elite special forces, known for his sharp instincts and quick decision-making. Now he spent his days looking out over a peaceful world, a world that had forgotten the wars of old. His days of fighting were behind him, or so he thought. It was during one of his routine patrols through the command center when a transmission came through. At first, it seemed like just another test signal from a distant colony. But then something about it felt wrong. A sense of unease gripped him. The coordinates were off. This wasn't a routine communication. Something more serious was unfolding in the darkness of space. Hayes turned to the communication officer, his brow furrowed. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. The officer was equally puzzled. "I don't know, sir. The coordinates are coming from a sector near the Zeta 9 Nebula. There's no known human presence there." "Run a full scan," Hayes ordered. His eyes were fixed on the screen now, something gnawing at him in the back of his mind. The message wasn't clear, but the tone. There was an urgency, an alarm in it. He'd seen enough to know that when things felt off, they usually were. Moments later, the scan revealed something that chilled Hayes to his core. A fleet. It wasn't a human fleet, and it wasn't any race that Earth had encountered before. The ships were enormous, their shapes unlike anything ever seen. The kind of ships that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "They're heading toward us," the officer said, his voice trembling. "How fast?" Hayes demanded, his heart beginning to race. "Too fast. They'll reach Earth in less than 24 hours. The room fell into silence as Hayes processed the information. The calm before the storm was over. Earth wasn't ready for this. The military might of humanity had grown complacent, focusing on peacekeeping and defense. There were no drills, no simulations for this kind of attack. But Hayes wasn't the kind of man to panic. He didn't get to where he was by being afraid of the unknown. Without wasting another second, he turned to his team. "Prepare for immediate action," he said, voice firm. "Get me a direct line to command. We need to call the others. This won't be a simple diplomatic exchange. Earth is under threat." Across the world, others were beginning to notice the same strange signals. The military leadership, the world leaders, and even civilian scientists who kept an eye on cosmic events had all felt it. The same unnatural shift in the stars, the growing sense of dread that spread like a shadow across the planet. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, delegates from every country scrambled to understand the situation. There was no denying it anymore. The galaxy had noticed Earth, and it wasn't here to make friends. In the quiet halls of the Pentagon, General Maria Alvarez reviewed the intelligence reports, her fingers flying across the holographic display. The Kalthar Empire, the alien race responsible for these massive warships, was known in military circles, but they were a legend, a story passed from one generation of soldiers to the next, a name that haunted commanders in every corner of the galaxy. No one ever thought they'd reach Earth. "They've never attacked a planet this far from their core," Alvarez murmured, mostly to herself. "And they've never been this aggressive." By now, the world was in full motion. Every country activated its defense systems, scrambling fighter jets and activating planetary shields. Still, something deep inside each person, whether military or civilian, knew that these measures might not be enough. The Kalthar Empire was not a force to be underestimated. Back at Earth's military command center, Hayes stood alone in front of a large digital map. His mind raced. 24 hours. That's all they had. 24 hours before the fleet would be in range to strike. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air thickened. There was no doubt left. This was not a diplomatic mission. The Kalfar were coming to conquer, and the only question now was, how would Earth fight back? "Captain," one of his officers called out from behind him, "we've received word from our allies. They're mobilizing too. Some of them have military strength, but others, they're asking for our help." Hayes didn't answer right away. His mind was already racing through every possible response, every decision he had to make. The moment was upon them. He knew that Earth had to stand its ground. There was no retreat, no backing down. If the Kalfar were as strong as the rumors said, humanity would need more than just weapons to survive. They would need to fight with everything they had: their ingenuity, their courage, and their unity. He turned to face the officer. "Get the word out," he ordered. "We're preparing for the worst. Tell every military commander, every leader, Earth is about to face its greatest challenge. We won't surrender. We'll make them understand what it means to challenge humanity." Outside the walls of the command center, the stars above Earth flickered ominously. The calm had ended, and soon the storm would arrive. The world was bracing for what was to come. Every military leader, every commander, and every civilian knew something was different about the moment they were living in. Captain Hayes stood in the heart of Earth's central command, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. The Kalfar fleet was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated, and no one knew exactly how strong they were or what their true purpose was. The transmission had been clear, but what they had left behind was nothing but questions. Why Earth? Why now? In the heart of Earth's largest city, preparations were underway, but there was a sense of unease that no one could shake. Military bases were on high alert, and civilian leaders were making frantic decisions, yet no one truly knew what they were up against. The Kalfar's fleet was vast, larger than any force humanity had ever seen. It wasn't just the size that was intimidating, though. It was their technology. The Kalfar ships were advanced, and their weapons, rumors suggested, could reduce entire cities to ash with a single strike. It was as if Earth was standing on the edge of annihilation, and no one could predict what would happen next. In the streets of every major city, citizens could feel the tension building. Some went about their business, pretending that the reports were just another round of unsubstantiated rumors, while others stayed glued to their screens, waiting for the moment when the attack would come. The air was thick with a strange combination of fear and anticipation. The military had mobilized, but their weapons, though formidable, were not prepared for something like this. The sense of helplessness was creeping in, but so was something else: resolve. Back in the command center, Hayes walked through the labyrinth of technology that connected every corner of Earth's defenses. His steps were purposeful, but his mind was far from calm. He knew this moment would define humanity's future, but no plan could account for the unknown. He had never faced a force like the Kalfar. Even with all his experience, this was different. The Kalfar didn't simply conquer worlds, they shattered entire civilizations. The very thought of them was enough to make seasoned soldiers hesitate. But not Hayes. He had seen worse. He had seen the face of terror up close, and each time he had fought back. He would do it again. Earth had no choice. The hours crawled by, and then the first signs of their presence became undeniable. On the radar, thousands of ships appeared in a formation so precise it almost seemed unnatural. They were out there, in the cold void of space, waiting for their moment. On Earth, that moment was coming soon. Hayes felt the weight of the world pressing on him as he made his way to the war room. He knew they couldn't wait much longer. He had to act. Earth had to make a stand, no matter what the cost. Then, a breakthrough came. A small but significant message intercepted from deep space. It was an alien transmission, encrypted but clearly directed at Earth's leaders. The words were simple: "We offer peace, but only on one condition. Surrender your world to the Kalfar." The message was like a slap in the face. Peace, a demand for surrender, was hardly peace, But Hayes knew this was a test, a psychological weapon designed to break their will before the real attack even began. The Kalthar weren't offering a chance for diplomacy. They were offering Earth an ultimatum. Hayes knew what his answer would be, but he also understood the gravity of it. A refusal meant war, and war meant everything Earth had worked for. Every life, every dream, could be lost. The moment hung in the air like a taut wire, waiting to snap. Hayes gathered his team, and with grim determination, he issued his orders. There would be no surrender, no retreat. Humanity had survived wars, plagues, and disasters. It would survive this, too, or die trying. The decision was made. Humanity would stand and fight. The countdown to war had officially begun. As the message reached the farthest corners of Earth's military leadership, the tension that had gripped the planet's heart only grew stronger. News of the Kalthar's demand spread like wildfire, and the mood was palpable. Some feared the worst, but others rallied behind Hayes' resolve. The question was no longer whether they could survive. It was whether they could fight back and defeat a force that had already crushed worlds far more powerful than theirs. The next 24 hours would be the most crucial in Earth's history. There was no turning back now. The Kalthar were coming, and humanity would either rise up and make its stand, or it would be crushed under the weight of the galaxy's most ruthless empire. Every human, from the generals to the farmers, knew that their survival depended on their unity. There could be no division. There could be no fear, only action. As the ships in space grew larger on the radar, humanity took its first collective breath. The war had begun. The days blurred together as Earth's military forces scrambled to prepare for the unimaginable. The calm that had once blanketed the planet was now replaced by a constant hum of activity. Every city, every base, and every fleet was on high alert. Captain Hayes, with his team, spent every waking moment ensuring that every weapon was ready, every defense system was active, and every soldier was prepared for the fight ahead. There were no guarantees, no assurances that Earth could win this war. The Kalthar were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, efficient, deadly, and ruthless. But Hayes had never been a man to back down from a fight. His resolve was unshakable, and as the hours ticked by, he pushed his team harder, knowing that their survival depended on it. The Kalthar fleet, now only hours away, was massive, far beyond anything humanity had ever dared to imagine. The ships, shaped like immense, dark shadows, filled the sky with an ominous presence that seemed to block out the stars themselves. Earth's defense systems, though advanced, were tiny in comparison to the overwhelming size of the Kalthar armada. The military had their work cut out for them. The vast majority of humanity had never even seen a warship up close, and now they were being forced to face an entire fleet of these nightmarish machines. But humanity wasn't known for backing down, not even in the face of impossible odds. Around the world, people were preparing. The governments issued calls for civilians to support the war effort in any way they could. Factories were repurposed to build weapons and armor. Supplies were distributed to every corner of the globe, and each nation stood united, knowing that their survival depended on their collective strength. No one would hide. No one would cower. This was Earth's fight, and they would fight it together. In the days leading up to the Kalthar's arrival, Earth's defenders gathered to discuss their strategy. General Maria Alvarez, Earth's highest-ranking military officer, addressed the Joint Council of Commanders. Her voice was calm, but there was an intensity in her eyes that spoke of her unrelenting determination. "We are facing an enemy that is more advanced than we can fully comprehend," she began, staring down at the holographic map of the solar system. "But they are not invincible. They are arrogant, and they are underestimating us. It is that arrogance that will be their downfall. Humanity has never backed down from a fight, no matter the odds. We won't start now." She paused, letting the words settle in. The room was silent, but the resolve in the eyes of every officer was clear. They were ready. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. They couldn't afford to lose. Over the next few hours, They coordinated their forces, focusing on one objective: to stall the Calthar long enough for Earth's full military might to be unleashed. The first wave of defense would rely on Earth's most advanced fighters, the X-78 interceptors, designed to be nimble and fast enough to evade the Calthar's devastating weapons. The second wave would consist of orbital cannons, positioned in the outer layers of Earth's atmosphere, designed to hit the Calthar fleet before they could make it to the surface. Earth's last line of defense, however, was still being kept under wraps. Only a select few knew the full extent of Earth's hidden weapon, a weapon that, if successful, could turn the tide of the battle. Hayes was not just preparing for the battle in the command centers. He was also leading the Special Forces group of hand-picked soldiers, tasked with infiltrating the Calthar fleet once it arrived. The plan was simple: take down the Calthar from within, hit them where they least expected it. He had trained with his team for years for moments like this, and now the time had come to put everything on the line. The final hours before the Calthar arrived were filled with tension. All across the globe, people were preparing, their nerves taut as the clock ticked down. The first signs of the Calthar came when the ships, enormous and looming, appeared on Earth's radar. The world watched in awe and fear as the ships emerged from the void of space, their massive forms dwarfing even the largest human-made structures. The Calthar had arrived. The countdown to Earth's greatest battle had begun. As Hayes and his team prepared for the final assault, there was no more time for doubts. There was no room for fear. It was time to fight. Earth's defenders knew that this battle, if they were to survive, would define their future. Across the world, citizens waited in silence, eyes turned to the skies. Some prayed, some hoped, and some simply held their breath. The fate of humanity rested in the hands of those who had chosen to fight. Humanity's first true test had arrived. Would they rise to the occasion and make their stand? Would they be able to push back the Calthar, or would they fall under the weight of a force that had crushed civilizations far greater than theirs? The answer was coming. The storm was here. The battle for Earth was now inevitable. The Calthar fleet hovered ominously above the planet, a dark reminder of the might and destruction that was poised to descend upon them. From every corner of the globe, humanity's forces moved into position. The air crackled with tension, and the first of the Calthar ships began to move into orbit. The sight of those massive warships, each one a floating fortress of death, caused even the most hardened soldiers to pause. But there was no time for fear. The war had already begun, and the planet's survival rested on the shoulders of every man, woman, and child who stood ready to defend it. Captain Hayes, standing in the heart of Earth's command center, felt the weight of the world press down on him. His mission, the one that could potentially turn the tide of this war, was clear: infiltrate the Calthar fleet and destroy them from within. The first phase of the plan had already been set into motion, with fighter jets and drones launched from Earth's surface, engaging the Calthar's outer defenses. The skies were now filled with explosions, laser fire, and the shrill sounds of weapons discharging in an unrelenting chaos of battle. Hayes, with his elite Special Forces team, made their way to the deployment bay, where their mission would begin. The plan was audacious: an assault on the Calthar's command ship. If they could somehow breach its defenses and plant a powerful device within the core systems, it could cripple the entire fleet. There was no backup plan. There was no retreat. Either they would succeed and turn the tide of the battle, or they would be lost to the void of space. As they climbed aboard their assault craft, the crew's faces were a mask of steely resolve. The shuttle lifted off, soaring through the atmosphere and into the chaos of the battle raging outside. On the ground, Earth's forces were doing everything they could to hold the line, launching counterattacks against the Calthar ships in an attempt to slow them down, but the Calthar's firepower was overwhelming. The surface of Earth was already beginning to burn in places. The Calthar's weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The shuttle carrying Hayes and his team entered the darkness of space, where they could see the Calthar ships in full detail. The scale of the invasion was staggering. The Kalfar weren't just a threat. They were an unstoppable force, seemingly intent on wiping Earth off the map. Yet through the tension, a fire began to burn inside Hayes. There was no turning back now. He would fight to the end. The people of Earth had placed their trust in him, and he would not let them down. As their shuttle approached the massive Kalfar warship, they encountered the first of many obstacles. Automated weapons systems, hidden in the void, began firing upon them. The shuttle shook violently as explosions ripped through the air around them. Hayes held the controls steady, maneuvering the shuttle to avoid the incoming fire, all the while keeping his eyes fixed on the target. The closer they got, the more the tension built. "Focus," Hayes barked to his team, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've come this far. No mistakes." They were almost there. The Kalfar ship loomed larger, its dark surface reflecting the light of distant stars. It seemed almost impenetrable. But Hayes and his team had one advantage: human ingenuity. They were faster, more adaptable, and more determined than the Kalfar had realized. The Kalfar relied on brute strength, but humans, for all their weaknesses, had a unique ability to think their way through problems. And right now, that would be their greatest weapon. The shuttle docked with the Kalfar warship, and the team quickly suited up in their specialized gear. As soon as the doors opened, they found themselves in the bowels of the Kalfar ship, an unfamiliar alien environment. The corridors were dark, lit only by flickering lights, and the hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the metal walls. Hayes and his team moved quickly, each step measured and silent, avoiding detection as they made their way deeper into the enemy vessel. But it wasn't long before the Kalfar realized that something was wrong. An alarm blared through the ship, and red lights began flashing in every corridor. They had been discovered. The team moved even faster now, aware that the clock was ticking. The device they carried was small, but powerful enough to cause massive damage. If they could reach the central core of the ship and plant it, they could buy Earth the time they desperately needed to regroup and counterattack. But they had no idea how much time they had left. As they made their way through the twisting corridors, they encountered the first line of Kalfar soldiers. Alien creatures with large, imposing bodies and advanced weaponry blocked their path. The firefight that followed was chaotic. The Kalfar's weapons were far superior, but the human team was faster, more agile, and they fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. The gunfire echoed through the ship's metallic halls, the sounds of battle ringing out in a place that had once been silent, serene. The team advanced, pushing through wave after wave of alien soldiers, their determination growing with each step. Hayes knew that this was the turning point. If they could reach the core and plant the device, they could cripple the entire Kalfar fleet. And if they failed, it would all be over. At last, they reached the central chamber, a vast, cylindrical room that hummed with energy. In the center, surrounded by a pulsating blue light, was the core. Hayes motioned to his team to set the charges, but before they could act, the doors to the chamber slammed shut, trapping them inside. The Kalfar weren't going to let them succeed that easily. The final stand was about to begin. As the countdown to destruction began, the team braced themselves for the battle of their lives. They had come this far. Now, it was all or nothing. Would humanity's last hope finally turn the tide of the war? Or would the Kalfar's ruthless empire extinguish Earth's future before it ever had a chance to rise? The answer would come soon. The clock was ticking, and the fate of Earth rested in the hands of these brave souls. The deafening roar of gunfire echoed in the chamber as Hayes and his team fought back against the Kalfar forces closing in on them. The once silent and sterile core room had become a war zone, chaos erupting in every direction. The Kalfar soldiers, large and terrifying, advanced with brutal efficiency, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. But humanity's last hope, Hayes and his team, were not backing down. Every soldier fought as though the fate of Earth depended on it, because, in this moment, it did. Hayes ducked behind a massive pillar, the walls shaking with each blast of laser fire. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained sharp. His team was working quickly, placing the last of the charges around the core. He could see the tension on their faces as they worked against the clock, knowing that if the Calfar stopped them now, Earth's last hope would be gone. "Keep moving," Hayes shouted, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "We don't have much time." One of his team members, Lieutenant Morgan, took a shot to the shoulder, a spray of blood staining her uniform. She grimaced in pain but didn't stop. She reloaded her weapon with one hand and continued placing charges with the other, her resolve unshaken. The Calfar soldiers were relentless. They were powerful, advanced, and utterly terrifying. Yet the humans didn't flinch. They had one thing that the Calfar could never understand: desperation. They had everything to lose: their families, their homes, their entire planet. And when you had nothing left to lose, that was when you were truly dangerous. Another blast rocked the room, and Hayes' eyes narrowed. They were running out of time. The Calfar had been relentless in their pursuit, and now the countdown was drawing near to its final moments. Hayes motioned to his team, signaling them to move to the final stage. They had to plant the last charge directly into the core's energy matrix, the heart of the ship. As the team sprinted toward the center, a Calfar soldier lunged at them, blocking their path. Hayes didn't hesitate. With one quick motion, he fired his weapon, hitting the Calfar square in the chest. The alien dropped, collapsing onto the floor in a heap, but there were more coming. Hayes didn't stop to look back. He couldn't afford to. Every second counted. The final charge was in place. But just as the team was preparing to make their escape, the door to the core room slammed shut with a deafening thud. The room was locked. They were trapped. "Damn it," shouted Sergeant Reynolds, the most experienced member of the team. "We need to get out of here now. The Calfar will bring down everything they've got to stop us." Hayes stared at the locked door, his mind racing. His eyes flicked over to the countdown timer that was now flashing red. 5 minutes remaining. There was no way they could manually override the doors in time. "We'll find another way out," Hayes said firmly. "We won't fail." The team quickly turned to another exit, a narrow ventilation shaft, hidden behind a panel near the back of the room. It was a tight fit, but it was the only chance they had. With Reynolds leading the way, the team crawled into the shaft. They could hear the sound of the Calfar soldiers pounding on the door outside, their growls and hisses rising in fury. The shaft was narrow, the air thick with tension and dust. It seemed like an eternity as they crawled through the cramped metal passageways, their movements swift but deliberate. Behind them, the sounds of the Calfar soldiers grew louder, their footsteps pounding in pursuit. Hayes' heart raced. He could almost feel the Calfar's breath on his neck. But there was no stopping now. Not when Earth's fate was hanging in the balance. Not when their last weapon, the charges they had planted, would be the thing that either saved the planet or sealed its doom. Finally, the team reached the end of the ventilation shaft. A hatch led to an escape pod bay, a small but functional vessel that could take them away from the ship before it exploded. Hayes rushed forward, trying to ignore the sharp pain in his side. The Calfar were close now. Too close. He opened the hatch, and the team rushed into the escape pod, barely managing to close the door before a heavy blast shook the room. They had no time to waste. Hayes punched in the launch coordinates, and the pod jettisoned from the Calfar warship. As they drifted away, a massive explosion rippled through space, the Calfar warship erupting into a fiery ball of light. The shockwave shook their pod, and for a brief moment, the crew thought it might be the end. But the pod held together. Earth's last hope had succeeded. Hayes and his team stared out the small viewport as the remains of the Calfar ship slowly drifted into the distance. It was a moment of both triumph and disbelief. They had done it. They had crippled the Calfar fleet from within, just as Earth's military might launch the final wave of attacks from the surface. Humanity had struck back. Earth had survived. But the war wasn't over. Hayes knew that. The Calfar would regroup, and they would come again, stronger and more determined. But now Earth had something that would make all the difference: hope. The escape pod's controls blinked, and Hayes set a course for Earth's surface, the planet's blue and green beauty visible in the distance. He could feel the weight of the team's victory, but he also knew that the real fight was still ahead. Humanity had proven itself. Now, it was time to finish what they had started. As the escape pod plummeted through the atmosphere, the roar of re-entry shook the small craft, and the sound of the air outside created an eerie, almost deafening hum. Hayes gripped the controls tightly, his hands slick with sweat, despite the cold interior of the pod. His team was exhausted, physically drained from the harrowing escape, emotionally spent from the battle they'd just fought. But none of them spoke. They all stared out the small viewport, watching as Earth's surface grew larger and larger, the blue oceans and green continents now coming into full view. For a brief moment, it felt like the battle was over. The Calfar had been dealt a devastating blow, and the sight of Earth below them should have been a symbol of victory. But Hayes knew better. He knew that the war was far from over. Earth had only survived this first wave, and while humanity had demonstrated its resilience and courage, the Calfar would not simply abandon their conquest. They would return with vengeance in their hearts and a desire to wipe humanity from existence. As the pod finally descended toward Earth's surface, Hayes' mind raced. He had done everything he could to ensure the survival of his team, but the cost had been enormous. The Calfar were ruthless, and while they had lost one of their greatest assets, they still had overwhelming power. The war was now personal. It wasn't just about defending Earth. It was about protecting the people they loved, the homes they had built, and everything they held dear. The pod's thrusters fired, slowing their descent, and Hayes steeled himself for landing. The team would need to debrief immediately, regroup, and plan their next steps. They had taken down one Calfar warship, but it was only a matter of time before the Calfar retaliated. And when they did, humanity needed to be ready. The pod touched down softly on the outskirts of a secure military base, the landing zone surrounded by makeshift barricades and armed guards. The hatch opened, and Hayes and his team stepped out, their feet touching the earth once more. For a moment, they stood in silence, breathing in the fresh air, knowing that this land, this home, was all that stood between humanity and extinction. An officer from the military base approached, his face grim. "Captain Hayes, we've received reports. The Calfar have regrouped, and they're preparing for a full-scale invasion." Hayes nodded, his jaw tightening. "We'll be ready," he replied, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "We've seen what they can do. Now, it's time to show them what we're capable of." His team gathered around him, each one wearing the same look of resolve. They had been through hell together, and though they were weary, they knew that their mission was far from over. They had no time to rest. The war was just beginning, and the cost of failure was too high. The world had watched in awe as humanity, against all odds, had fought back the Calfar. But as Hayes looked out across the battlefield, he knew that the future was uncertain. The Calfar were not going to back down, and humanity's greatest challenge had only just begun. But there was a fire in Hayes' heart that burned brighter than ever. He had seen the strength of human resolve firsthand, and he knew that no matter how dark the days ahead became, humanity would fight. They would rise, and they would win. "Get ready," Hayes said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "The war isn't over yet, and this time, we're going to finish it." His team nodded, each one understanding the gravity of what was to come. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious once. But now, they would have to face it again. And this time, they would need every ounce of strength, every shred of courage, and all the firepower they had to win. As the sun began to set on the distant horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the battlefield, Hayes looked back at his team one last time before turning toward the base. They had one shot to prepare for the coming storm, and this time, they would make it count. Humanity had proven that it could rise above the ashes. Now, they would prove that they could finish the fight.